So how do you normally approach your processing? I know everybody has a different school of thought on how much processing they use to get the end result. But I just kind of wanted to get your thoughts on how you approach it.
I'll use whatever it takes. I mean, I don't have rules, I guess. The guys who have influenced me quite a bit, like the Chris Lord Alges, if you ever watch Chris Mix, um, those EQs go to 12
Yeah.
for a reason in his mind, and it sounds great. So that's not necessarily something I train guys on, but the thing that I try and teach is, don't worry about what you're doing with the gear. Worry about how it sounds.
Mm-hmm.
The meters on compressors. It's like there's a reason they go to 20. Sometimes it sounds good, not always. That doesn't mean you always just hammer it, but I try not to get hung up on numbers and things like that and just do it by ear. With anything, I always start with EQ and get that taken care of, and then I might go towards compression, and then it's whatever else that it needs. With drums, gates, I use those a lot.
Yeah.
Sometimes I might do something to kind of fatten up the bottom on it. Sometimes I might use a transient shaper of some sort to get a little more punch out of it, or take it off. So it really kind of depends on a lot of things, because it's all based around what drum is actually there. And in the studio, I just add a sample. So,
Or a couple of samples.
yeah, sometimes.
Yeah.
Not too often. I'm not a big sample guy, but I do use them. So
Yeah. No, I get it.
I wish I could use them live sometimes. It would definitely speed some things up. And there are some situations I've been in where it would really help. But
Yeah. One of the churches I worked at, we actually we used to use pads with real cymbals. But the sounds that I think I forget if it was the Yamaha or a Roland, I forget what we were using, but it was like, what are those called?
The electronic drums?
Electronic drums. Thank you. Yeah.
So you'd use the electronic cymbals with?
No, we had real cymbals.
Oh, with the electronic kit.
Right. It was just too loud, and they would play softer on the cymbals. We tried a bunch of different configurations, and I don't want to get into too much of the details because I might be negative for some manufacturers out there. But all that to say is that we ended up using triggers, with the laptop in order to get great samples, because the sounds that were stock with whatever we were using, it just didn't sound good. I was like, guys, it doesn't sound good. We need to switch this up. So we ended up getting a bunch of samples, and maybe we use like Slate Trigger or something like that. I'm trying to remember. It might have been.
I think that's where it's gonna. I mean, and people will argue with me on this, but I think that's where drums are going. I mean, we're going, with guitar amps. We've kind of ditched amps, and we're all modeling on that. Keyboards are all electronic and basically in the box. The bass guitars are all direct. Everything is direct up there, but the drums and the vocals. And when I listen to the stuff like Superior Drummer can do these days, it's getting really, really close. And when you start putting that stuff into an actual mix, there's not a lot of people who are going to tell the difference. I mean, the thing with a lot of these instruments that we're used to is they were designed for a time when we didn't have loudspeakers and sound reinforcement. Everything was acoustic. The recording industry is only 100 something years old, but music's been around for centuries, millennia even. So all of that stuff was all made to project beyond the stage. And these days, with our modern systems and the way we're capturing stuff, having all that projection sometimes does not work in our favor. A lot of times it doesn't work in our favor. I mean, we're taking drums and we put them into fish bowls and try and seal them off to keep all that sound from bleeding into well, for me, it's vocal mics. Sometimes it's the front row that they don't want to hear the stuff. So it wouldn't surprise me if 5-10 years from now, electronic drums actually were a
The
bigger
norm.
thing. I don't know about the norm. I think it'll take longer for those to integrate than some other things, but
I think
you
it's
know,
going to be hard to emulate the feel of an acoustic kit, though, for a drummer. You know,
I don't know. I think some of the electronic stuff these days is getting closer and closer with
closer, but
the
yeah,
heads, and
I think it's that whole visual thing.
perception.
Yeah, like with you standing.
well, there's a
Maybe
lot.
more.
There are
Sounded
electronic
good the
kits these
first server.
days.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
true. Yeah.
Well, no, you're right. There is some of that. If you're listening with your eyes, how does it sound? That's a big component to the way we perceive things a lot of times. And there's all kinds of stuff floating around on the web about that.
We've always seen the electronic kit with the drum shield. You know,
Yeah,
Too loud.
but there are electronic kits now. They are real. They're real shells, and I'm not even talking about like the V drums.
yeah,
I mean, they're like actual drums. They look like real drums. They're the right depth, and
Yeah.
you can get that stuff. So it wouldn't surprise me at some point if that happened. It might not. It's hard to say. But I think, especially in churches where, sometimes it's amazing when you've got a house kit, how many drummers there actually are. They're not, there's a lot of people come out of the woodwork who are suddenly drummers, but they're not all necessarily, they're not like the drummers I work with most of the time. These are real drummers, and they're not guys who I would want to replace with electronic stuff.
yeah.
Yeah.
But for other churches, I mean, I think electronic drums, I don't think they're quite there yet. But I'm sure that I'm going to be very surprised in the next probably 5 to 10 years on things.
Yeah. Somebody's working on it.
Have you mixed
And given how much like sample replacing is going
Yeah.
on
Yeah.
on records these days,
Oh, yeah.
the negativity that we have towards electronic drums to me is kind of funny. Although I think, all that stuff kind of goes in cycles, and we're probably on the verge of sort of cycling back to more acoustic instruments.
I think they all have their place.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, we work with a lot of clients, and obviously in West Michigan, we've got hundreds of churches around here, and most of them were built to project sound.
Yeah.
So they're super acoustically live.
Yep.
And a lot of them, in that case, an electronic kit is the right solution for them because they don't have professional musicians, first of all, and they don't need all that acoustical energy jumping all over the place. So,
well, and some of it is just
they almost
maintaining
have
the
to have one.
instrument. I mean, I go into places sometimes and I go to the drum kit and I'll bang on it, and the floor tom and the rack tom are tuned the same.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm like, hey, this is the same note, it's like dung dung. It's like, let's fix that. And sometimes the heads, I can just tell they haven't been changed in like 2 years. And you really need to change that stuff on a regular basis.
I agree.
So,
TuneBot,
going back
for all
to
drummers out there, for all churches, if you need to learn how to tune drums, but you don't have a great ear, TuneBot is a great solution to helping you tune your drums.
Yeah, and there's so many videos these days. If you want to learn how to tune drums, you can find that out. But going back to what you were saying, asking about approach to drums, to me, it starts with the instrument. If the instrument doesn't sound good, there's not a whole lot I'm going to be able to, I might make it work, but it's not going to be great. So you got to have a good, and kick drums in particular, one of the things I found, and someone I was just talking to about this and talking about how, drummers will spend all this time on their snare drum and the toms and getting those tuned right, and then nobody bothers to tune the kick drum. So it all needs love.
Yeah.
In the end.
It does. You're right. One of the things I wanted to dive into, do you have any questions to bounce off of that before we move on?
No, that was great.
Okay.
No,
all right.
We're good.
So much of what we do as audio engineers is relational, right? And so you were talking about the source, right? So if the drums themselves don't sound good, right? Maybe the player isn't hitting a rim shot, right? Or maybe he's hitting the drums like on the outside of the head instead of the center of the head, those sorts of things, right? More feel. And again, starting with the source, so much of what we do is relational, right? We need to have conversations. We need to get out of our booth, out of our comfort zone, behind the mixer, and we need to actually go have a conversation, maybe talk about maybe it's with the director of music, the player of a particular instrument. Can you speak into that a little bit, Dave, and your approach just overall in that sense? Any tidbits that you can kind of recommend to any audio engineer out there?
Yeah, the relationship thing is real important. I come from a different school on some of this than some engineers. I know there are some guys who will say you should get down there and get your hands in it and do that. The musicians I work with, I'm used to working with guys who have their tones dialed in. They have it the way they want. So I have to be real careful on just going down and putting in my 2 cents. When I'm out and about, if I'm working with people I haven't worked with before, I usually try and establish a relationship with somebody first. And typically it's going to be a music director or, whoever's in charge of the music. They're the ones I want to have a relationship with first, because one of the things that happens with any performer really is it's real easy to get in some people's head and not in a way that helps them. So for me, I don't want to just go up to somebody and say, "Hey, can you fix your tone?" Or, "Oh, is that
You
that
say
the
you
only
want to fight?
yeah, is that the only snare drum you brought this week?" Or,
Do you have
you know,
another one of
do you
those?
have another guitar? You can't.
Is that yours?
There are some drummer, like there's drummers I work with and I know who I will say that joking to them because I can do that because I have a relationship with them. Or we can talk about, I'm not sure that this is the right snare for these songs. Is there another one? And usually when it's a situation like that, usually they're asking for that kind of feedback too. But if I'm out on a training thing and working with another church, I'll usually find one person and I'll give feedback to them on things because I don't know what is the best way to really approach this person. What is kind of their love language? What is going to motivate them and encourage them versus discourage them? Because if you start discouraging people, even if it's unintentional,
Yeah.
it can end up hurting the whole performance. Pitch with vocalists, that's like a perfect example. Like, I'm not going to tell a vocalist they're pitchy unless they ask me to do it. Because if a vocalist starts thinking about it, they start thinking about it too hard. Now they're not putting, the emotion into the performance.
More robotic.
Yeah. And for
then make 'em
me,
sharp.
and a lot of people have different thoughts on this stuff. I know there's a lot of people, they don't like tuning vocals. I don't have issues with doing that. I have tools that can help in certain things. So if somebody is if someone's in the ballpark, I can refine them. I'd rather have the performance out of them than this kind of technically perfect thing. But even telling somebody, they're off or stuff like that, there are some people you tell them that and it like motivates them to do better. But
Yeah.
there's a lot of people you tell them that and now it's going to be in their head and they're going to chase their tail trying to get something right. And that's the last thing I want to do with a performer. I mean, I just think about when I was playing in bands and doing that. There are some people I know who could have told me that. And there are other people where it just would have devastated me.
Yeah.
So until I know that I'm the person who can say stuff to somebody without devastating them, I'm not going to mention that, or I try not to anyways. I'm sure there are plenty of times where I have said the wrong thing to people over the years, but I try not to get too into that, and make sure that I have permission to kind of give input and say things. And some of that just comes from, the days when I was a studio intern, where you kept your mouth shut, and then if you were hired to engineer something, you were there to engineer, and the producer was there to give feedback. And a lot of the live gigs I'm in, there are music directors, there are music producers involved, there are service producers, there are all of these other people doing that. So for me to kind of give feedback and get into that, I have to be really careful with, what is the role that I am playing in this whole thing. Because when I start saying things and people don't want me to, it never goes well for me.
I think they call those people skills.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah, that's some of it.
Knowing the situation and knowing where you fit, and not come walking in like I know everything.
Right.
And,
right.
I'm in
And so
control.
we've hit this a lot from the side of like the introverted side. A lot of techs are sometimes known to be introverted. I don't want to, it's not a blanket statement. Not everybody is. But sometimes they could be a little bit just kind of hesitant to give feedback at all, right? When sometimes that feedback can be helpful. But I love it because we've hit on this several times. What I love that you're saying, Dave, is you got to pick your moments, because sometimes
definitely.
you can get in their head and it's going to affect the performance. I love that. I love that you're saying that, because sometimes I tend to lean the other way. I'm going to give you too much feedback,
Well, you can tell too who the true professionals are.
Yeah.
Because musician or behind the console, a true professional, I'm always interested. There's never a time when I'm behind the console that if someone else next to me hears something that I'm not, I want to know. I may not agree,
right?
But I want to know.
Right. You want that feedback.
Can be the same way. Those that aren't are.
There's plenty of musicians though that ask for feedback.
Sure.
I have 2 or 3 bass players that always would ask me, how's my tone? And
usually those are the guys you're like, oh, it sounds fantastic.
Yeah, usually it sounds great.
The ones who are willing to ask.
Right.
Yeah.
I do have a quick, can I tell a quick story?
Go ahead.
The word I just popped into my mind when you were talking. Out of everyone at this table, I'm like, mixing is not my, my genre. It's not my.
He's a lighting guy.
This is what I am. No. Anyway, I have not spent the time behind the console. I've learned a ton.
I'm just kidding.
These guys, and I love listening to you guys too, just to pick up on things. But anyway, I prior to you guys, this is many years ago, I went to a church and we were just converting them. They had been doing, band praise and worship type stuff for a while, so they weren't like just getting into it. But I walked into their church with for a practice for the first time. They had me and say, "What do we?" And it was one of those things where it's a small church, very reverberant. I walked up to the main console and pulled the left and right faders right down, turned off the house PA, and it was still so stinking loud. I couldn't. There's no way you could mix anything, right? Small church, lots of things going on.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, well, I think the first thing we need to do is we need to get this stage volume down. Anyway, long story short, we went to mostly all in-ears. Everyone took their amps off stage. Everyone's plugging in direct, except for this one guitar player. He shows up. Crazy thing, and this guy was crazy good. I mean, this guy, I could tell when he was warming. He was the best musician in there.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And he he plops his amp down, plugs in. Of course, his amp is humming like a son of a gun. He jams a mic in front of it, and he just starts going. And halfway through the thing, the praise director told me, we're going to do this. She says, he said, you're going to have some pushback from some people, but we got to get there.
Okay.
This guy was not having, anyway, long story made short, I felt awful that night because I literally watched this guy unplug his guitar, pick up his amp, and walk out of the church. And 2 weeks later,
Wow.
I talked to them later, and she said he hasn't been back. I'm like, oh man, I felt awful. I'm like, I am not. And they're like, no, man, that's exactly what we needed to happen. That guy has been that way, and he's an amazing musician, but just could not. It was all about him.
Yeah.
And
it's
the dude
unfortunate.
had to learn anyway. It was a nightmare experience for me. I felt so awful.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Well,
Well, it's a collaborative.
And I didn't tell him to leave. I just said, man, you gotta can you at least turn that thing down?
Work with me a little bit, man.
Yeah.
No, man, it destroys my tone. Oh,
Gotta love his passion. But what we do is collaborative, man. Like Dave,
Yeah.
just like you're saying, it's collaborative, and we have to be as engineers just as careful as with our pride, right, or our knowledge, as much as the musicians are.
Yeah.
Right. And so we all have to work together, and that's when you get something that's really great.
I felt bad too. I got another story.
Go for it.
This was a orchestral setting with a praise band. Bass player would always sit next to the piano player, and his idea of playing bass was to follow the piano player's left hand, and I think he really had a hard time hearing, or I basically worked with this guy for over a year and a half, and I play bass too, so I kind of worked with him, massaged him, tried to get him to work with the drum kit a little more, and I moved him away from the piano, and he just couldn't get it, man. And finally, I multi-tracked the piano player, the bass player, and the drummer, and I sent it over to the musical director. I was like, and I isolated those three. I was like, you got to listen to this, And so he sent that email back over to the player.
Oh, no.
And the player actually was like, well, it's not, to me, it sounds like I need to serve somewhere else.
Wow.
It was.
Hey, how come yours ended on a good note and mine didn't?
That was funny.
I like your story better.
Well, I felt bad because he quit, but it's like, it's not like we didn't give him a chance and we gave him feedback upon feedback and like, hey, can we get you some lessons? Let's work with you. But
you can tell we don't get to work with professionals near as much as you do.
Yeah.
But
it's all relative.
How many times I've had it walked in and the worship director's like, okay, here's where we need to be.
Yeah.
And you're the outside guy, so you can say anything to anybody. I'm like, really, that's not my thing.
That's not my job.
I'll
Right.
help you, but come on,
Yeah.
don't. That's what they want us to do. They just want to start throwing our weight around, and that doesn't work too well.
No, it doesn't.
Well,
no.
I don't think there's any reason why volunteer musicians can't sound great. I mean, it's really.
Oh, agreed.
I think that's kind of a myth. I know there's a church I was working with in Florida. Their band, it was all it was well, I don't know if it was all volunteers, but it was probably 90% volunteer. Maybe they had a paid music director in the band, and those guys were great. So it's not. I think the volunteer badge is something that gets used as a cop-out. Sometimes it gets used as a cop-out to have real conversations with people about how to improve and what they're capable of. It gets used as a cop-out for lowering the bar down low. And if you want to do that, I mean, I guess that's fine if that's what you're going for. But to me, it doesn't have to be. You can do a lot with volunteers.
Oh, absolutely. I absolutely agree. But then there's always depends on if you're a church plant and you only have like one bassist and you know that person's like every week and it's like, man, we just need to find one or two more people like to alleviate this because we're just running them hard. There's got to be a bar that people can meet, right? But it doesn't have to stay there forever, and you need to inspire people to continue to improve, right?
Well, I think it's all about investing in those volunteers.
Absolutely. Sometimes you forget about them.
Yeah.
Like you need to grow on your own versus us setting them up for success. Yeah.
Send them to clinics. Bring a bass player in to do a clinic.
Bring them in.
Yeah.
Well, and sometimes I think it's you've got to have the right vision for what on the one hand, it's great to dream and to have these big aspirations of having, the huge kind of this big band of amazing players and, the light show and the big PA and the big auditorium and all that. That's fine. Especially if you're a plant, you're a smaller church, you want to get there. I think that's great. And to think about how do you get there, but you have to start where you're at. And if you don't have the musicians, I mean, you can do the multi-tracks thing. A lot of churches are doing that these days, or just change the way you do music. I was in a 20-somethings ministry for a long time when I was back in Chicago, and a lot of the worship we did, it was just acoustic because we couldn't put a band together at the time. Or somebody couldn't be there one week, but maybe they were there another week. It's like, okay, well, if they're not going to be here this week, what do we have? You have to play to your strengths.
Yeah.
If you've got
Absolutely.
you've got a great vocalist, and you've got, somebody who plays guitar, I mean, you can do a lot with that, or plays piano. I mean, you just need an accompaniment instrument. I mean, I grew up Catholic, and how many of those services were, it was just a piano and a vocal, and the musical style was not my thing at the time growing up, but you can do a lot with that kind of stuff. And I think a lot of times we get really hung up on, well, we want it to be this thing. And it's like, well, that's great. Work towards it, but you have to start where you're at.
That's a great point. Yeah. Yeah. I absolutely agree. That's really, really good.
Well, it doesn't have to be perfect to worship.
No.
Right?
No, not always.
We'll never be perfect.
We will not. Well, we will one day.
The multi-track is perfect, right, Dave?
That's debatable.
The click. All right. At least that we could all agree that the click is perfect. No, but all right. So we're gonna move on from that really quick. Something that's just fun for us to touch base on.
Really quick. We've not been doing real well on that one.
No, we haven't. No,
but that's good.
But we love it. We love having the
too.
conversation. So you get to mix on probably many a different console, Dave, right? So when you're mixing live, I mean, workflow wise, the way it sounds, if you had to put everything together and you say today, or I mean, even a console from the past, if you want to resurrect something, I'm good with that too. But what would be your preference?
Drum roll. Here we are.
You have one of those?
Oh, I don't know
No,
if
I
I want to
haven't.
endorse anything. I mean, I like the Avid stuff.
Okay.
Still,
Yes.
I do a lot of stuff on Digicos these days, so that's another one. I actually like the D Live stuff.
Yeah.
I've been really surprised at how much I've enjoyed working on that. So
Yeah.
those would probably be, if I walk in and there's one of those three there, I'm probably going to feel pretty comfortable. I think for me, like the bigger thing, if I've got Waves stuff there, that's more what I'm so familiar with. I know that if I can't get something out of the console that I like, I know I can at least go to that for effects, because onboard effects with most consoles are not my, they're not my favorites. I'll say it like that.
That's fine.
So,
I still use an external reverb. I can't find a good reverb on board.
yeah, I'm
It's
not.
fun for me.
I mean, I know. I'm
I mean,
sure
they're
somebody
good.
likes them, but
Yeah.
I'm not that person.
No, that's good. Well, all right. And another one for you that I like to toss out there, and then we could actually go around on this one a little bit. But Dave, you can only pick 3 microphones, 3 mics that you have to die with, right? What are the 3 microphones you're picking?
57.
I know what one is. I was gonna say.
I don't know beyond that, because I'm not super picky. So, okay, let's do a 451, because I need a pencil condenser, and then something large diaphragm. Maybe, I don't know, like I haven't worked with those much. I don't know. I used a lot of Shure KSM stuff. I don't know that that's necessarily what I want, but I think a better way for me to look at it was, I need a dynamic, so I'll just do a 57 because I can make that work.
Yep.
Pencil condenser and like a large diaphragm condenser.
Okay.
So,
nice. I like the way you're thinking. That's good. Michael.
3 57s.
That's all you need.
I can do anything with
I can
that.
do anything. It's a workhorse, man.
Now, if I had my dream mic, probably be a AKG C12.
Okay.
So
All right.
get a pair of those.
Yeah.
I'd be
Todd.
happy.
I'm probably not a great one to ask.
Okay.
I will though. I will say about the whole how you kind of got used to working with something. It's interesting because I grew up on a steady diet of Electro Voice as a young, like you live in Chicago. So
Yeah.
Kalamazoo is right down the road from me, and
Right.
and all that. So
That's the go-to right
I,
there.
you know, but
Know
I
what you're
made the
gonna
change.
get.
I use a lot more Shure than I ever did, but
Yeah.
I used Electro. If I just grew up thinking there was no other microphones but Electro Voice.
Right.
Well, when I was playing
This is way back though.
in bands in Chicago, a lot of the clubs, the engineers from Shure would actually be mixing in those clubs, and they would bring in microphones, and they'd be, hey, try this, try using this tonight. So I just got used to
It's kind of
seeing
fun.
this stuff around,
Yeah.
and down here in Atlanta, we've got a lot of Shure stuff too. They're just kind of rider staples, I think.
I would
So-
agree.
You just can't go wrong.
Yeah, it's the
Yeah,
only
I would agree.
thing the president uses.
Yeah.
Well,
Gotta say something.
All right, let's not go
I
there.
gotta think about
Let's
that
not
one
go
for a
there.
minute.
Let's not go there.
Presidential package.
Yeah.
yeah.
I would agree on the 57.
You know, I would say watching the president, I've never looked at what microphone he's
Are you
using.
kidding?
That's what struck me. Yeah, I know. That's weird, isn't it? Everything else I could tell.
Oh, I did a
I mean,
did
he
a
just
gig with
captivated my
the First Lady. I did a gig with Michelle Obama, and had to be 57s, and
Yeah.
it was not
Pretty awful,
easy.
wasn't it?
Well, you know, it was at North Point, and we were set up in both auditoriums, and I was in kind of the overflow auditorium, and I had a live band in there that I mixed, but getting the feed from them, you know, because it was 257s on the podium, and I was like, you know, I've got way better podium mics in the back that we could use on this, but you know, it's 257. They're 10 feet away from her, or you know, it seems like, you know, they're maybe not necessarily that, but they're not where a 57 needs to be. I had on my side, I had the gain wide open on the console, and the fader probably at plus 12, just to be able to hear.
Oh my goodness.
So I can't imagine how rough it was in the actual room where she was trying to speak.
Yeah.
With gain before feedback on that.
Yeah.
Was that a writer thing? Was that like hey, this is how it needs to be? She doesn't like to use a headset or a lav mic?
No, I think it's because we were talking to some of the guys there. It's a Secret Service thing. I think all of those, because they brought the 57s that were used. It wasn't like, hey, we need 57s for it. It was, these are the microphones we're going to use. Because
the Secret Service really knows microphones.
Well, no, but they've gone through and made sure there's no bombs in them. I mean, there's so much more to it.
Cables like separately in case one gets cut, or I've heard that kind of rumor, but
I don't remember if we did that. I know there were two. I know there was I think there was like something bulletproof in front of the podium, and there was a lot of security on that. So
got it.
Isn't that
it was an interesting gig.
It's
a pretty cool story.
57
right here.
Yeah.
57 in their wrist. Yeah, coming. Coming. Yeah.
I'll tell you, one of my most frightening gigs was with a billionaire and his daughter. I was running sound for his wedding, or for her wedding.
Oh, that sounds awful just to even begin.
Yeah, it was such high pressure. It was 2 lavs. I mean, all of us here could mix that with no brains, but the pressure in that room was just ridiculous.
It has to be perfect.
Oh yeah. Bridezilla from a billionaire. Wouldn't that be fun?
Oh,
So.
man, that is crazy. One of the things that we didn't actually dive into, Dave, that I think I don't know if a lot of people know this, but when you were at North Point, and one of the coolest things about that building was one of the rooms. How much did one of the rooms seat?
I think it was 2,500 and 2,200.
Okay.
The East Auditorium had a balcony. The West didn't.
Okay.
But the dimensions of both of those rooms were the same.
So they had one auditorium, and then instead of building a bigger room, I think this is the case. Correct me if I'm wrong, Dave. They just built behind the stage another replica of the room so that they could fit double the capacity, basically. And both rooms shared the backstage area, and so so they just mirrored each other.
Mm.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
it was a
really
big
cool setup.
It's
it was a
interesting.
big experiment at the
Simple.
time. The story that I was told was basically when North Point launched, they grew too fast, which is a great problem to have as a church, and they needed a solution, and they weren't sure about building another, like a bigger auditorium, because I don't think the main one that they had at the time was that old.
Yeah.
So someone had the idea. I think it might have been Aaron Hawthorne who had the idea of the video church thing, because video church was not a thing at the time, and they built another auditorium on the other side. And if you look at it, it was kind of built so that it could be used as a gym and kind of a multi-purpose room, because the thinking was, hey, if this doesn't work out, we're still going to use the space for something.
Sure.
So they built that room, and then that's when they did the center screen thing with the kind of the fixed wide shot. They got a camera from NASA. I think there were 2 of them out there. I think it was a Panasonic HD camera, and there were only 2 available, and they had to talk NASA into loaning it to North Point. And they set that up, and they did a test with it, and it worked. And that was what led to, hey, if this worked in an auditorium on the same site, could we try this with another church offsite somewhere? Which led to the video thing. So
yeah. And so what was cool about
So they're
the
just
one
sending
room,
video to the next room. So there's
well, we
one
would
room
have
that's
we'd have a live band in both rooms.
okay.
So you had
Got
live music on both sides, and then when it got to the message, that was being fed from the other side. And there's a center screen that would come down in the middle.
and it was like a life-size Andy Stanley on stage.
Yeah,
right?
pretty close.
Yeah.
Was it bi-directional? Like you could have him preach in the other side and then video cast to the.
No, we
direction?
were not set up that way, but we could have been. I can't remember when
They
we
had
put
some
it
good
in.
acoustical isolation between them rooms, even though they shared the backstage. There had to have been more than just.
Yeah. How was that, Dave?
Could you hear
it? Depends on the frequency. Most of the time it wasn't a big issue, because you had both sides going at the same time. It's like, if you think about being in like a multiplex movie theater, and you're both watching action movies, you don't hear the explosions next door while there's explosions going off in your room. But if you're trying to watch, if you're watching a romantic comedy in there on a date, and the action movie's next door, and you can start hearing the rumbling. We did a Christmas once or twice where we did not sync the auditoriums, and there were parts of that service where you could hear the low end from next door. And I think originally there might have been better isolation between those rooms, but over the years holes had been punched in walls to run cables and things like that. And anytime you break that air seal, you're letting all your acoustic energy into another space. So
yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, very interesting. So let me ask you this: any advice that you would give to audio engineers today? What are some of the ways that they could get better at what they're doing, even though the live industry has kind of faded for a season? What advice would you give to upcoming audio engineers in order to get better at their craft, better at what they do, even during these times?
hire me to train you.
I love it.
There
Yes.
it is.
There it is, man.
I mean, that's part of what I do. I think aside from that is definitely listen to lots of music and like really listen. Try, it's tough because on the one hand, I don't want, when I'm talking to guys about it, I don't want you to necessarily tear it apart, but you have to kind of get a sense on what's going on. One of the main things that I'm working with churches on, or just anybody when I'm going in to train them, is just the overall balance of things. And that's one of the things I hear when I listen to online streams. It's just the balance of everything isn't off. And it's real easy, I think, when you're in the same location, you're working with the same musicians all the time, you kind of get this impression in your head. It's like a template of what is this all supposed to sound like. Because a lot of times I go in and I just make some little balance changes and people go, oh, that's exactly what we were going for. And it's like, yeah, you were close. You get accustomed to it. And sometimes that comes from, some pastor 7 years ago made one comment about turn this thing down, and it's been buried in the mix ever since. And that guy's not even on staff anymore. He's long gone, and it's all changed out. So, listen to music, listen to your board mixes. I find so many churches these days, they don't have any kind of setup to record their board mixes. And sometimes it's hard to judge tonality and how that really is working because things don't always translate. But you can listen to that and get a sense of the balance and what's your balance like. And these days, if your stuff is streaming, you should be going back and listening to your stream as long as it's not hyper limited. I usually try and record just the raw kind of left right feed off of the console if I can. But I know on a lot of gigs that I go into, there's just no way for me to even do that because they don't have a setup for that at all. So I would say that. And then the other thing is virtual sound check. Virtual sound check is just huge in getting better. The thing about mixing is not a technical discipline. It's a craft. If anything, it's a musical discipline. And all of the guys in the band, they can all go home and rehearse and practice and get better. I mean, that's how I learned to play guitar years ago. It was, you sat there and you would woodshed. If you're a mix engineer and you don't have a way to woodshed, you're not going to get better very quickly, especially for churches where you've got volunteers and maybe they're serving once a week, once a month, twice a month. The whole 10,000 hours thing probably has been busted, but there's definitely some truth to that. And if you think about
you still got to put the time in.
Yeah. How many hours is if somebody is only serving, let's say once a month in a year, they're on 12 times. That's nothing. How many hours of experience is that? So finding ways to kind of increase the amount of time that you actually get experience, I think that's huge. And having something where you can do virtual sound check is a big deal. And if you don't have that, even if you can just multi-track it, take it home and throw it in a DAW and just experiment and mess around. There's some things are easier to learn in an environment where the acoustics are much more controlled. So, maybe a really good pair of headphones at home is going to help you a lot more than being in a really reverberant live space, especially for things like compression and understanding what attack and release do and things like that. Sometimes I know a lot of live guys who have told me they didn't figure it out until they got in a studio because the room is smearing so much of that. It's hard to kind of lock your ears on it, but once you get a sense of it, it's easier to go back into that kind of wet, reverberant environment and tweak it and make it work for you. So, and you can just hire me. So
that's all great advice. Yeah.
I think
Absolutely.
to master any craft, it really does take time.
Yeah.
We had this world-renowned concert pianist that was attending our church, and this guy, they came to the States so he could build his United States career and start building a following, because he would sell out cathedrals in Europe all
Okay.
over. Just really super high-end pianist. And his son was learning at the time, and he was, I think, 8 years old. His name's Simeon Mulder, and fantastic little kid. He would just run around the church, and he's so excited about all the tech and stuff, and he'd hang out in the sound booth and everything. But after school, every day he went in the choir room, and he was on that piano for 3 hours.
Whoa.
And there was times I'd walk by there, and I'd hear him just going over 2 measures for over and over and over again, just to get that spot on perfect as he was learning a piece.
That's
And I
incredible.
always think about him because, we always want to get to the end game quickly. I mean, we live in a fast food society. We want the end goal.
Yeah.
But it really does take discipline and practice to master any craft. And in the early stages of my career, I'd sit down with a multi-track with a venue, Avid Venue is what I cut my teeth on. And, I'm like, well, what does compression do here? So I would spend weeks just playing with it to hear what it does.
Yeah.
And I'd turn my screen off and just kind of mess with the knobs and, and being nowadays that we have digital consoles, it's so easy just to screw everything up, and then you just load a file and you're back to where you were. So, it's easy to learn. You just got to put the time in.
Yeah, I totally agree. And one of the practices that and both of us came from the studio world, so we kind of understood what everything did. So when we went to the live world, I feel like that is an easier transition at times versus the other way around. I think they can both work. But then being on staff really gave us an edge to be able to get more of those hours in, where you're just putting those hours and getting those reps and over and over and over and over. And one of the things that I implemented is I never trust what I did last week. Not to say that I don't think it was good, but it's like, I'm not going to assume that every decision I ever make in my life is 100%
one and done.
bulletproof. Right. So I'm going to be like, man, maybe I didn't hear that right last week. Even though it's the same chain, same drums, even maybe the same drummer, I'm going to double check things a little bit and just kind of maybe start from scratch and A/B stuff and that sort of thing. And I think it's always good to check yourself before you wreck yourself, just to, quote Ice Cube. So.
What?
Yeah, no, but Dave, where can people find you if they want to check out some of your articles? I've seen videos of you with Wave plugins several times. You're also on other podcasts and that sort of thing. So where can people find you?
The easiest place to find me is my website, goingto11.com, and I've got articles up there. If you want to get help, I do a lot of consulting, and sometimes people like bringing me in to talk about audio stuff because I don't sell anything. So I don't come in with an agenda to do that, and people like that, and then I can refer them to vendors that they can talk to and build relationships with to do that, because that's the other thing I encourage is build relationships with your vendors. But goingto11.com, best place to find me, get a hold of me. I'm on social media, FOH Dave on Twitter, FOH Dave1 on Instagram. That's
somebody beat you to the punch.
No, it's a long story. I think I told it. I do a podcast now, and I think I told the story in an episode. It's not as the fact that there is a story is probably more amusing than the actual story itself.
Got it.
So,
Got it. What's the name of your podcast?
It's the Going to 11 podcast.
I love it.
So go listen and find that story.
Yes. And
it's on there.
A couple of things that were brought up before we end our time. Virtual sound check was brought up. A lot of equipment was brought up. If anybody listening to this, if you have any questions about that, we know exactly how to get you up and running. for that, feel free to reach out to Michael, to Todd, to myself, and we can get you the right information for your setup in order to be able to accomplish those things if you're interested in a virtual sound check setup, or even any other audio information that is relevant to that conversation. But Dave, you have been an inspiration to me personally. No joke. No joke. Like that.
That's cool.
And your articles and even your posture towards, somebody you didn't even know, and allowed to ask you questions, to reach out to you. You've always had a great temperament and approach to things, and I have benefited greatly from it. So thank you for being a part of our podcast.
Cool.
And I'm sure we'll have you on again at some point to maybe talk about something else. But
Cool, man. Like lighting.
Yeah.
yeah, we'll talk about lighting.
No, we won't. That would be the shortest. That'd be the shortest conversation ever.
On, off.
Yeah.
We turn the lights on and we
They
turn
go
them
off. Okay.
Yeah. Most people worship with their eyes closed anyways?
Yeah, they do. So it doesn't even matter.
I'll just say more haze. That's the
what I
answer.
do. More haze, more
haze.
praise. More haze, more praise. That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
More
Well,
haze.
Dave, thanks so much, man.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Thanks,
Yeah.
man.
Take care.
Thanks.